Спасибо большое, Владимир Владимирович, за...
Thank you, Mr. President, for this all-encompassing address. I can't help but, take up from where you left. You remember the revolutionary situation, the elites, the people. Whom do you associate yourself? Well, with the people, of course, because I am, below from the people. I said that on multiple occasions. My mother, my family, my parents, they were workers. They, they didn't even have vocational training. She used to work as a nurse, a nanny, and my father used to work as a night warden. He didn't want to leave me at the kindergarten. And this has always been the case with me. I listen to the pulse of popular life, how rank and file citizens live. So internationally, you are on the side of those who do no longer want. Well, I advocate what I've just said. I advocate democratic relations with due regard for the interests of all participants of international cooperation, not just the interests of the so-called golden billion. Yes, I understand that. We met 1 year ago. Back then, there was some tension in the international affairs, but when we look at October last year, it seems an idyll. A lot has changed over the last year. The world has been turned upside down, as some put it. To you personally, what has changed over the year that has passed internally in your perception of the world and of the country? What's been happening, what is still happening? In Ukraine in particular, well, these are not changes that are currently underway or are underway since the beginning of the special military operation. No, these changes have been happening for many years now. Some have been paying attention, others have not, but these are tectonic shifts of the whole global order. These tectonic plates are constantly shifting and moving, and as experts say, first, it's all very calm, very tranquil. These plates are on the move constantly. Then they come against one another, the tensions build up, and an earthquake happens. So this is how it happened here. First, an accumulation of tensions and then a flare-up. But these changes used to happen in the past because new centers of power are emerging, and I'm not the only one to say that. These changes are happening due to objective reasons. Some power centers are wilting, and I'm not going to say why that is happening. This is only a natural process of bloom and perish and change. New ones are emerging mostly in Asia, but also in Africa. Yes, Africa is still a very poor continent so far. But you see the great potential to tap into. And the same applies to Latin America, and these changes will happen, these tectonic shifts. And it's the West that has driven us to this point. If there are any more questions, I'm ready to get back to what has happened in Ukraine. We were not the ones to organize a coup d'etat in Ukraine, which resulted in a series of tragic events, including our special military operation. We are not the ones who did it, but that does not matter. What matters is that tectonic shifts are always happening, and they will continue to happen independent of our actions. Our actions are simply highlighting more vibrantly what's happening, and they can push forward a little bit these processes that accelerate as compared to how they were unfolding before. But on the whole, these processes are inexorable and inevitable, and they would have happened regardless of how Russia could have acted in Ukraine. But what about our country? Something new over the last year? As far as Russia goes, yes, there are some issues. I referred to losses incurred due to the special military operation, and I always say that, yes, there are economic losses, but there are also enormous acquisitions. What is happening, indubitably, in the end, I emphasize that, in the end, will benefit Russia and its future. Why is that? Because it'll help reinforce our sovereignty in all domains, and in particular in the economic field. Just some time ago, with anxiety, we were thinking that we were turning into some kind of Islamic colony because we could not do anything without our Western partners. We could not conduct financial transactions. We did not have the technology. We thought we would be devoid of the markets or sources of new technology. We didn't have anything. They could simply, flick their finger and everything in Russia would collapse, but it didn't. And the fundamentals of our economy turned out to be far stronger than anticipated by others, even by ourselves. And this purification, this better understanding of our capabilities, this adaptability and the current conditions, as well as the objective need, not just to accelerate import substitution, but also to replace those who are leaving our markets. All of this has demonstrated that our businesses are capable of taking the place of those who are leaving. Those companies are whispering to us, we're not leaving for good, we will soon get back, but they're still selling billions in assets at $1. They are doing that, they're selling it to the management. So there is an agreement. They intend to get back. Well, how else? Certainly it's not a gift to these individuals. We understand the sentiment, we know it. And this is of great importance. We have come to realize in the end, we've always been saying that we are a great country, but now we understand that we can do it. We understand the consequences, the bad consequences in the midterm, because they are, shutting down access to technology for us, but that is what they were doing before. Of course, right now the situation is more difficult, but it turns out that we can do it. Another important component, a spiritual one, probably the most important one. First, this motto, we are not leaving anyone. And this is a motto which has been embedded deep in the hearts of each and every Russian and other citizens of Russia. The willingness to fight for our people leads to greater unity in society, and this has always been our country's strong suit. We've confirmed it and reinforced it. And during the last year, has there been anything in our country that has turned out to be true disappointment for you? Well, no. So no conclusion should be made, no changes. Well, these conclusions, we need them all the time, organizational conclusions, especially human personnel, human resources. We have to think about training new specialists, new workers. We need to find new people who are capable of working at a better level than the previous generation. But I cannot say that there is anyone who turned out to be disappointing to me that I have to, let someone go. Very good. Thank you. Mr. President, in February, you took the decision to launch a special military operation. It came as a surprise to all, especially to the majority of Russian citizens. On many occasions, you've given an explanation of the rationale as well as the causes, but still, this is a decision of such magnitude which cannot be taken without a special impetus, a special nudge. What did happen before this decision was taken? I said that on multiple occasions. I do not think I am going to say anything new, especially in this room, in this audience. I'm not going once again to talk about the NATO expansion, which was absolutely unacceptable. Everyone knew that. Simply ignoring outright our interests in the field of security. And in the end of last year, yet another attempt we made with our proposals. It was cast aside. They said, just, I'm not going to say the words, but it was ignored, our proposal. With the support of their Western patrons, Kiev authorities publicly refused to abide by the Minsk agreements. The leader said that they didn't like one point of the Minsk agreements. He said that publicly. Other high officials said that they were not going to stick to the Minsk agreements. The previous president said that he did sign the Minsk agreements, but he assumed that they would never be implemented. What else is there to say? If you need to embed something into the consciousness of millions with, internet, with the media, this is one thing. And another thing is real politics, because there are some things that are happening and that are not being, seen by people. And finally, real things came to light, became public. And we had to decide what to do with Donbass, because people were living for 8 years under fire, and they're still living under fire. We had to make a decision nonetheless, recognize their independence. But simply recognizing their independence and leaving them to their own devices, that was unacceptable. That is why we took the next logical step to incorporate them into the Russian Federation, because they would not survive on their own. They expressed their will, we know their sentiment. And of course, the fire still continued to reign, and Kiev authorities were prepared to conduct new military operations, because there had been previously 2 more military operations, and people were still living under the fire, and we had no other choice but to launch a military operation. Because, well, the other option was to simply wait for the Kiev authorities to begin a new military operation. That was the rationale behind our decision. Let's get back to 2014. Why did they need to execute this coup d'etat? Because Yanukovych all but renounced authority. He agreed to hold elections, and I do hope he's not going to take offense. He stood little chance of winning. So why did they need this violent, anti-constitutional coup d'etat? There is no response. Probably the response is to demonstrate who the master was, to tell everyone to do as they are bidden. There is no other explanation I can think of. Once the coup d'etat was executed, people refused to accept that, and this is what triggered the string of tragic events. The West could have implemented the Minsk agreements. Well, they're telling me that if I had been in the shoes of the then Kiev authorities, I would have signed these agreements as well. But they did sign them. And the heads of those unrecognized people's republics also put their signatures to the document. One of them was later assassinated. So all of these actions resulted in the current tragic events. That's it. Do you have this sentiment that society has, that the enemy has been underestimated? Well, you know what the thing is? we saw what had been happening. 8 years they had been building fortifications in the Donbass, very strong fortifications. Secondly, we understood full well that this process would continue. And the further it went, the more dangerous it would have been for us, and the greater our losses would have been. And this is why we did it. And NATO was expanding its military presence in Ukraine, and these fortifications would have popped up not just along the line of contact. They would have popped up in different areas as well. And from the south, from the north, our troops are going around the Donbass, and if we had allowed it to run further, if they had had a chance to acquire new weapons systems, then the situation for Russia would have been absolutely different from the point of view of running this special military operation. On multiple occasions, you said and you wrote in your article that we are one nation. Did you change your opinion? No, because it's a fact, a historical fact. In the 9th century, these territories saw the birth of Russian statehood, first in Novgorod, then in Kiev, and then they joined together. It was one nation that spoke one language, ancient Russian, old Russian, and the changes in the language started to happen only in the 14th century, in the 15th century, due to the Polish influence, because the western parts of the Russian state ended up in a different country, and hence the changes in the language. During the development of an ethnic group, different things happen. If one part of an ethnic group achieves a level when they think of themselves as a separate nation, you have to treat that with respect. But this principle, this process happened due to a number of reasons. Some territories of Russia ended up in other countries, and these countries were pursuing their own interests. In Poland, these Russian territories were being Polonized, and heavy influence was exercised on the Russian language. You can look up the documents in the archive, and you can see letters to Warsaw, to Moscow, saying we are Russian Orthodox people, are asking Moscow, and so on and so forth. They asked Moscow to take them in the country, and they asked Poland to respect their tradition and their customs. And that is what they wrote. They wrote, we are Russian Orthodox people. Yes, afterwards, different processes started to happen. Then an enormous Russian Empire was born. European countries tried to set up, and they did, a certain barrier around the Russian Empire. You know, this principle that goes back to the classical antiquity, divide and conquer. And that is when these attempts started to happen, to divide and conquer the Russian nation. This happened in the 19th century, and then it was growing in magnitude, and it was supported by the West. And some people liked that. They liked that their language was unique, their customs were unique. This is the result of this divide and conquer policy. There's nothing surprising in that. Yes, they did achieve their goals, certain goals, and then it led to collaboration with Hitler during the Second World War, when Ukrainian collaborationists were used in actions aimed at eliminating Russians, Poles, Belarusians. It is a historical fact, well known. The most violent, terrible affairs were given to Bandera followers. This is part of our history. But basically, Russians and Ukrainians are one nation. This is historical fact. So it's a civil war to a certain extent. Yes, to a certain extent, we ended up in different countries, regrettably, due to a number of reasons.
First and foremost, because when the Soviet Union was created after the breakdown of the Russian Empire, and I wrote it multiple times in my articles, the Bolshevik leadership made the decision to pacify the nationalist sentiment who were originally from the Ukraine, and to give them originally Russian territories without asking the population who were living in those territories. They gave the Black Sea region and Donbass over. First, Donbass was given to Russia. Then the delegation from the Ukraine came over. They came to speak to Vladimir Lenin. He invited the representatives from Donbass and said that we need to redecide. So they redecided and they gave Donbass to Ukraine. In that sense, the Ukraine was sort of an artificial state that came together. After the Second World War, and it's a historic fact, Stalin gave over a number of Hungarian, Polish, and Romanian territories to Ukraine, taking away their territories from the countries. The Polish people who did not take part in the Hitler coalition took over some of the East German territories. That is how the modern Ukraine came to life. What I'm thinking right now, and it just came to my mind, the only true guarantor of the Ukrainian statehood, sovereignty, and territorial integrity could have been only Russia, which has indeed created the modern Ukraine. Well, if we talk about guarantees, I remember we spoke about that in the spring, and then it went off the radar. I think it's a rhetorical question, considering that there are hostilities and many things happen there. But both you and the Russian officials have said multiple times that the special military operation is going according to the plan. So what is the plan? The society does not really comprehend the plan. You know, initially, I said it right on the day of the beginning of the special military operation. The main thing is to help Donbass. I have already said that. If we acted differently, we could not place our armed forces around Donbass from two sides then, if we acted differently. The second thing, Luhansk People's Republic is fully liberated. The military action taking place around Donetsk Republic. When our troops came from the south and the north, and it became apparent that the people who live there on these traditionally, historically Russian territories see their common future with Russia, we couldn't help but respond. Therefore, the events took place, and we all saw that. And that was the logical follow-up to the situation that was happening at that point in time. The plan and the goal has been one, to help people who live in Donbass. That is what we proceed from. And specifically, the General Staff is planning. Well, I do know what they have in mind, but I don't think that's the case when I need to go into details. Thank you. Dear friends, I have satisfied my initial curiosity by monopolizing President, and now everyone can ask the question or questions. Let's begin with Ivan Safranchuk. Ivan Safranchuk, MGIMO University. You said that ahead of us we have a very important decade in development of the world and our country. But I have an impression there is a certain door into that decade. So I have the question about this door. If you could speak up into the microphone, I cannot really hear you. Lately, there is a great increase in nuclear rhetoric. Ukraine went from irresponsible statements to practical preparation for nuclear provocation. And representatives in the US and in the United Kingdom are making statements where we hear certain overtones of the possibility, of admissibility of using the nuclear weapon. Biden speaks about nuclear Armageddon, and we hear comments from the US that, well, it's not that scary. At the same time, the US are speeding up the modernized tactical and nuclear weapons in Europe. So what's happening is that there is nuclear saber rattling, but they do not recognize the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you could explain, Mr. President, is indeed the world on the threshold of a possibility of the use of nuclear weapons? And what would Russia do in this case as a responsible nuclear world power? Well, look, when the nuclear weapons exist, there is always a danger of them being used. Second, the goal of today's fuss around the nuclear threats and the possible use of the nuclear weapons is rather primitive. I don't think I'll be very much mistaken when I say what the goal is. I've already mentioned the dictate of the Western countries and their attempt to apply pressure to all participants in the world arena, including the neutral or countries friendly to us, that all comes to a naught. And they're looking for additional arguments to encourage and convince our friends or neutral states that they need to all together stand up to Russia. The provocations with the use of nuclear weapons build in tensions about the very notion of Russia using the nuclear weapons. Are being put to use to this end to have an impact on our allies and our friends and neutral states, and to tell them, look at who you're supporting. Russia is so scary. You shouldn't support it anymore. Don't cooperate with it. Don't buy anything from them. Don't sell anything to them. That is a very primitive goal. What's happening in reality? We've never said anything proactively about possible use of nuclear weapons by Russia. We have only hinted in response to those statements that the Western leaders have made. Madame Liz Truss, the ex-Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, she said it directly. In her conversation with a representative of the media, she said that the UK is a nuclear power, and the Prime Minister has in his mandate the possible use of nuclear weapons. Well, I'm not quoting her, and she said that she's prepared to do that. And no one responded in any way. Well, she just made a folly. She was a bit out of it. But can you say these things publicly? Well, even if she said it, someone should have corrected that. Washington, for example, could have said that they have nothing to do with that. They don't know anything about it. There shouldn't be any offense made, but just to distinguish themselves from that. And what we are to think, we think that this is a coherent position, that we have been blackmailed, and what should we do in response? Pretend that we haven't heard anything. A series of other statements were made on that matter. The leadership of the Kiev regime is constantly speaking about its strive to have a nuclear weapon. Now that's the first part of it. And now there are more discussions about what we're doing at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So what are we doing? They're saying that quite directly, but they're always hinting that we're shelling and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Are they out of their minds? Well, we're controlling this nuclear power plant. We have our troops based there. I've spoken to one of Western leaders. It's been several months since then, we're saying, what should we do? They're telling us to withdraw heavy weaponry from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We said, consider that done. There are no heavy weapons there. Well, get rid of other weapons as well. Well, it's nonsense. You're laughing. It seems laughable. But I'm basically giving their statements verbatim. I said that you asked for representatives of IAEA to be based there. We have agreed to that. They are there. They even refuse to live in a hotel. They're living right on the territory of the nuclear power plant. And they can see with their own eyes who is shelling and where the projectiles are coming from. But no one is saying that Ukrainian troops are shelling the nuclear power plant. No one. However, they're building tension and building hype, accusing Russia. That's nonsense. It seems it should be nonsense, but that's really happening. I've also said it publicly already. I think there are 3 or 4 high-voltage transmission lines that have been down by the Kiev regime around the Kursk nuclear power plant. Unfortunately, FSB didn't catch them, but I hope they will in the future. The sabotage was done. Well, they've done it. We informed all our Western partners, but silence is what we received in response. They did not respond in any way. So they're striving to have some kind of a nuclear incident, to lay the blame at the Russian door, and to start the new spiral of fighting against Russia, sanctions against Russia, and so on. I don't see any other point other than that. That is what's happening. Now, a new idea. We have published the intelligence data for a reason about an incident with a dirty bomb being prepared. We know where it is done, more or less. There is still some nuclear fuel that has been repurposed. The technologies that the Ukraine has allow them to do that. They've loaded up to Tochka U missile, or they could blow up and say that Russia did that Russia has acted a nuclear strike. But it doesn't make sense for us to do it, neither politically nor military. Still, it's been done. And I gave the instructions to Minister Shoigu to call all of his colleagues and to inform them about that. We cannot disregard such things. And now they say that IAEA wants to come over and to check the nuclear installations in the Ukraine. We are for it. It needs to be done as soon as possible. And the inspection should be as wide as possible, because we know that right now the Ukrainian authorities are trying to get rid of all the traces of their preparations. We know that. And now, as for, in the end, about use and non-use, the only country in the world that has used nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state is the United States. They did it twice against Japan. What was the goal? There was no military purpose in that. It brought zero benefit militarily. It made no sense to use the weapon against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, against civilians, basically. Was there a territorial threat to territorial integrity of the U.S. or their sovereignty? No, of course not. There was no point militarily to do that. The war machine of Japan was already broken down. They could not put up any resistance, basically. Why did they need to kill off Japan with a nuclear weapon? Japanese textbooks usually mention that the Allies have conducted a nuclear strike against Japan. So Japan is in such a grip that they cannot write the truth in their own textbooks. But they remember this tragedy every year. Still, well done. The Americans, well, we should follow suit. They're well done, you know. That's what's happening. So the U.S. is the only country in the world who has used nuclear weapons. And it was done by them because they believed it to be in their interests. As for Russia, we have our military doctrine. Let them read it. There are specific articles in the doctrine dedicated to the cases and how Russia believes it possible to use the weapons of mass destruction as nuclear weapons to protect its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and to ensure the safety of the Russian people. Tomorrow, we're celebrating 60 years since the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when they decided to pull back. Can you imagine yourself in the role of one of the leaders? Well, apparently Khrushchev. Not in any case, no. We'll not get to that. Well, I cannot imagine myself as Khrushchev. Not in any case. Well, as a leader who will have to solve this kind of issue, we are prepared to solve any kind of issue. We do not refuse to do that. December last year, we have proposed to the United States to continue our dialogue on strategic stability. No response since December last year. We've received silence. If they want to, we're prepared. But if they don't, it's okay. We're developing our own modern technologies and delivery systems, including hypersonic weapon systems. We're self-reliant. We don't need anything. It is clear that they will catch up with us on hypersonic and so on. It's apparent that it's a high-tech country. It's a matter of time. But they're yet to catch up with us, and we have everything. We're developing these technologies. If someone wants to build a dialogue with us on that, we're prepared. Rasuran Maharaj, please.
You have answered a direct point that I raised earlier, but if I could expand upon what I'd asked. Escalating and accelerating crises continue to further reveal the precarity, the precarious position we are in and what our system currently is driving us towards. So unequal exchange continues, as you pointed out. Inequitous distribution, especially of human capacity, capability, and competence, render future prospects of reconciliation and reform inside an unfair yet hegemonic system extremely bleak. Sanctions, fear of reprisals, have rendered monetary sovereignty meaningless, especially with the weaponization of the payment system. In our contemporary conjuncture, what could then constitute a more democratic and workable alternative to the current international system of payments and settlements?
This is one of the key questions. One of the key questions of today's development and the future, not only the financial system, but also of the global world order. I think you've hit the bullseye here. After the Second World War, the U.S. has created a Bretton Woods system and has fortified it and enforced it in many dimensions. They've created international institutions under their control in the sphere of finance, international trade. Now, these systems are failing. And a major mistake by the U.S. was to use dollar as a weapon in the fight for their political interest. That undermines the trust to dollar and other reserve currencies. It undermines the trust drastically, and I know what I'm talking about here. Now everyone is doubting whether they should have international reserves in dollars. It's not that easy to step out of dollar system because they have created a powerful system that keeps all the reserves in their grip. It's very hard to de-dollarize, but everyone is thinking about the future. I've already said it, but it bears repeating. How we see the future of the international financial system. Well, it's a general message, but still, each country should have opportunity for sovereign development, and it should be ensured, and we need to treat with respect the choice of every country. That's important, also in respect to international financial system. It should be independent, depoliticized, and naturally it should be based on the financial system of the leading countries of the world. if it will be created, and it's a very complex process, still it is possible, then the international institutions will work more efficiently as well.
They have to be either reformed or built anew. And these institutions will provide assistance to those countries that are in need of such help. And first and foremost, this new financial system should be built and created in such a way that it transfers knowledge and technology. And if we do that, if we bring all these components together, then the very economic model and the financial system will meet the interests of the majority, not just the interests of the so-called golden billion, which we have been speaking about. And as a precursor to this system, we could cite the need for expanding transactions and settlements denominated in national currencies. Given the fact that the US financial authorities are using dollar as a weapon, hampering transactions, not just in our case and our partners, but also in the case of other countries, well, given that, this desire for independence will push forth transactions denominated in national currencies. I think in India, 53% of our transactions are done in national currencies, and 27% with some other countries, and we're also creating the same system for other countries. In China, we are carrying out transactions in rubles and renminbi, and the same goes for other counterparts. As far as our own financial system is concerned, I think the main avenue is to create a system that is depoliticized, that is based upon national monetary systems. And this should be built to create a supranational currency system that is going to secure transactions. This is possible. This is practicable. And now we are first making steps in transactions in national currencies, and then we'll propel that to the regional level. I think this process will continue. Thank you. Colleagues, please introduce yourselves when you ask a question. Alec Iskandaran, please. Mr. President, I have come from Armenia. My question is about my country and my region. Recently, we have been hearing an increasingly vibrant discussion about a treaty prepared between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And these discussions highlight that there are two competing projects: the Russian project with Russia as an intermediary, and the West project with the West. The situation is a risky one. And across the region, the situation is volatile, teeming with risks. What does Russia think in that regard? How is Russia going to respond to the situation? What does Russia plan to do in this context in future? Thank you. Thank you. I don't know whether this was said publicly before. Maybe it was said, but be that as it may, I'm going to say that. Even if it was not said publicly, I do not think this is a secret. For many years, we've been engaged in dialogue with the Armenian side. We were proposing that the Nagorno-Karabakh issue should be settled in the following manner. Armenia was in control of 7 areas of Azerbaijan, and Armenia said that they should be moving towards normalizing relations. There are 2 areas. Next to the corridor. These are big areas. At a certain stage, an agreement could be reached with Azerbaijan to transfer 5 areas, because there's no sense in keeping them. They are desolate. People have left. They were basically chased away from these territories. There's no point in keeping them. And to have still connection with Nagorno-Karabakh, these two areas would have been sufficient, and we believe that this would be, just, it would be fair to get refugees back, and it would have been a good step towards normalizing the situation in the region as a whole. But the Armenian leadership chose their own path, as you know, this is what led to the current state of affairs. Now a question begs itself of how to resolve this issue and how to achieve a peace settlement. We believe, and this is our position, that there is a need for a peace treaty, and we support peaceful resolution, as well as the delimitation of the border and the settlement of all the other border issues. The question is which path to choose, but it is up to Armenia and to the Armenian people and leadership to decide. Whatever option they choose, should it lead to peace, we will support it. But we are not going to impose anything. Nor can we dictate our will to Armenia. We're not going to. If the Armenian people and the current Armenian leadership believe that a certain option is preferable, as far as I understand, it can be the Washington draft, which recognizes Azerbaijan's sovereignty of Nagorno-Karabakh. If Armenia deems that acceptable, well, let it be. We will support any choice the Armenian people makes. If Armenia, the Armenian leadership and the Armenian people believe that Nagorno-Karabakh has certain characteristics, unique ones, that have to be respected, and that this should make its way to the peace treaty, then this option is also on the table. But they need to secure agreement from Azerbaijan. These conditions, these terms have to be acceptable to the other side as well. This is a complex matter, but Armenia is our strategic partner and an ally of ours, and to a large extent we of course have respect for the interests of Azerbaijan, but we will support Armenia's choice. 2 years ago, at this very platform, you spoke very highly about President Erdogan. You said he was not wagging his tail and he was a true man. A lot has happened over the last 2 years. What about this assessment of yours? Is it still in effect? Yes, he is a strong, tough leader. He is guided by the interests of Turkey and the Turkish people and the Turkish economy. And to a large extent, this is what explains his position on energy-related issues, on the construction of Turk Stream. We proposed setting up a gas hub in Turkey for consumers in Europe. Turkey has given its assent, of course, also based on their own interests. There are interests in tourism, in construction, in agriculture. We have very many coinciding mutual interests that go in the same direction. And never does President Erdogan give anyone a chance to take advantage of him. But of course, engaging in dialogue with Russia, he also advocates Turkey's interests. Turkey as a whole and President Erdogan are tough negotiators. Many decisions take a lot to come to. They require long discussions, tough negotiations, but we still achieve what we set out to do. And in that sense, President Erdogan is a consistent and reliable partner. This is probably the most important characteristic. He is a reliable partner. Is he not trying to take advantage of you? Well, as I said, he is a tough negotiator. He always takes care of his interests. Well, not his own personal interests, the interests of his country. This does not mean he's trying to take advantage of us. He pursues the interests which he and his government and his advisors believe to be important. We are trying to make sure that the decisions we make suit our purposes as well, and usually we manage to arrive at solutions even to the most difficult of issues in Syria in particular, security-related issues and economic issues, infrastructure-related issues. And up until now, we did manage to arrive at solutions. Let me reiterate. We understand that if the negotiations have been tough, but we managed to arrive at an agreement nonetheless, then it's going to be done. Dayan Charity-Becker.
My name is Dayan Jaitilaka, former ambassador of Sri Lanka to the Russian Federation. Mr. President, it is said that Russia is now facing a proxy war waged by the collective West and NATO. If so, it is probably the most serious threat faced by Russia since 1941. At that time, during the Great Patriotic War, the Soviet leader, who was a communist, reached out to the Orthodox Church and to Russian nationalism in order to form a broad front to defend Russia. Would you say that in a similar spirit, you would revisit the Soviet-Russian past, the communist heritage from 1917, to extract any useful elements of it, including the history of the Red Army? And would you think it worthwhile to reach out to the communist elements, however few they are in Russia, to join in a broad patriotic front? Thank you.
Моя позиция заключается в том,
My position consists in the following. I believe we have to take advantage of all of our historical heritage. I believe we should not renounce anything. We should not turn away from the positive elements we used to have in the history of the Russian Empire. There was a lot of positive in the USSR. There were advantages, disadvantages, problems and issues that were overcome in different fashion. They had different consequences. As far as our relationship with the left part of the political spectrum is concerned, as well as other political movements, I can tell you that the special nature of the current Russian society, we have a consensus as far as Russian foreign policy is concerned. Yes, we have pro-Western elements whose families live there, whose children study there. It's a very small component, and every country has such an element. But mostly our society enjoys a consensus. There is a great level of consolidation, regardless of their political hue, regardless of how they view the path Russia should take in its development. Communists believe that everything should be nationalized once again, that we need to return the state into the economy. Well, how efficient this is going to be, it's hard to tell. To an extent, at a certain stage in history, this probably might happen. We have a law on nationalization, but we are not resorting to it because there is no need for that. We assume that we need to use the most efficient tools for our country's development, mainly the principles of the market, but under the guidance of the authorities and the citizens. We need to use these advantages to achieve such goals as greater well-being for the country, eradication of poverty, taking efforts to build more and better, achieve better health care and education, and address other important issues we're facing. That is why we are working and engaging with those who profess left-wing views. We have respect for them. As you have aptly said, the Soviet Union was controlled by the Communist Party for a very long time. I'm not gonna into detail saying what bad things they were and others. You also mentioned religious organizations. We have 4 traditional religions in Russia. All of them are vastly patriotic as far as the Russian Orthodox Church is concerned. Throughout all of Russian history, it's been together with its faithful, with its believers and with its people. And the current stage is no exception. We have some characteristics, special characteristics right now with regard to our religions. We're not interfering in the internal life of our religions. We probably give them vaster freedoms than some countries that deem themselves to be democratic ones. We believe that we owe our religions a great debt because during the Soviet times their property was taken away from them, sold sometimes. It dealt a heavy blow to religious organizations, in particular to the Russian Orthodox Church. That is why we're trying to support all of our religious groups without, however, interfering in their internal affairs. I think it had never happened before. On the one hand, we sense this general patriotic sentiment. People are patriotic, they want our country to be stronger, our interests abroad be protected. At the same time, we provide full freedom to these organizations, to our citizens. This situation, I think, yields the results we seek. Very well. Kubat Rakimov, please. Kubat Rakimov, Kyrgyzstan. Mr. President, Russia truly is a leader of a new anti-colonial movement across the world. Russia's dedication to traditional conservative values is also resonating. But throughout the history of the Valdai Club, we've seen a great demand for social justice, for a fair organization of social relations. What is your view of this matter, and how can we serve you as experts of the Valdai Club? This is my first question. My second question is as follows. What do you think about the prospect of transferring the capital of Russia eastwards to the center of Russia, to the center of Eurasia, to be closer to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Thank you. As far as a more just social order is concerned, as per our constitution, Russia is a social state, a social justice state. Everything we do, all our national goals are dedicated to addressing social tasks. We can go hours and hours, and even our today's discussion is not going to be enough to demonstrate fully that everything we do, whatever we do, seeks to address social issues. There are still many issues outstanding, and I said that in the past. We need to develop our economy, and upon this basis we have to address education, healthcare, technological development issues. We have to change the very structure of our economy. Structural changes are most important. This will lead to changes in the labor market, and we have to think about people who are going to be freed up when the market is going to change. We have to retrain them, to give them additional training. As far as the Valdai Club is concerned, it brings together experts of different kinds. And if experts demonstrate to us the trends in key areas, then we would be very grateful to you, because we will take your views into account in building our plans. We will take into account your positions on the trends that we have just spoken about. We need to understand what's going to happen tomorrow to build the policy for today.
As for the transfer of the capital, Yes, we've heard such discussions within Russia. There used to be the change of the capital that happened several times throughout the history of the Russian state. Historically and mentally, Russia has always been associated with Moscow. And I know that there are issues in the development of the capital as a tremendous city, as a megapolis, but I have to say that under the leadership of the current mayor, Mr. Sobyanin, has been solved much more efficiently than in other countries of the world and other megapolises. Yes, there are some issues that have to do with transportation and social infrastructure development. Still, over the past years, Mayor Sobyanin has done a lot for these issues to be curbed and to create the necessary conditions for the citizens of Moscow and everyone who comes over here to Moscow to work there or as a tourist, for them to feel comfortably in the capital. A lot has been done for the development of the city in the past years. The issue of over-centralization of all federal institutions in Moscow is indeed there. Just like in some other countries, for example, I'm an advocate of the solution. Just like in other countries, what they've done is they've decentralized and they have transferred mandate and competencies of the capital to other regions of the country. For example, we're creating a judicial center in St. Petersburg. The Constitutional Court has been transferred to St. Petersburg. We have specific plans for the Supreme Court. Well, it needs to be done without haste to create the right conditions for the judicial community to work in St. Petersburg. It will be done without fuss, without haste. Some major companies, for example, which work in Siberia, for example, but their management is situated in Moscow. They could have placed their headquarters in Siberia. And that happens. For example, Rushydro. They've created their base in Krasnoyarsk, I believe. They're creating their HQ there, as well as some of the central authorities could be more decentralized around the territory of Russia. That will benefit the governance system and the regions where they will be situated. Thank you. Ivan Timofeyev. Good evening, Mr. President. Ivan Timofeyev, Valdai Club. My question is the following. Russia has experienced a tremendous amount of sanctions against it. You've mentioned the freezing of our assets of 300 billion. We can add dozens of billions of the property of our citizens and our organizations. They're planning to confiscate these assets, and they're developing the necessary mechanism. Also, financial limitations, bans on supplying technologies and goods to Russia, Russian oil supply banned, and manipulation of everything. You know, we know it full well. You've mentioned it in your statement. Our economy was not expected to survive that, but it did. To a large extent, it was done because the economy remains a market-based economy. It adjusts. Business is looking for new target markets. Where possible, it tries to substitute imports. The government is taking a number of steps to support entrepreneurs. However, considering the extreme external conditions and sanctions, maybe the time has come to further deregulate the economy. You mentioned decentralization, for example, to cut down on the number of inspections and to decrease the regulatory burden. Well, this is our choice to cut down on the number of inspections, well, to get rid of over-regulation coming from the state. You know that the routine inspections have been scrapped, not only for SMEs, but for major businesses as well, and will, if it hasn't been said before, will continue the same conditions for 2023 as well. As for regulations, this regulatory guillotine that we've spoken about, I think it led to more than 1,000 legislative acts have been repealed and substituted with less than 500 new ones. I hope they've been updated. I think it's 400 and something. New regulation acts that regulate the economic activity. We'll continue down this path. Naturally, with the exceptions to those types of production that have to do with certain risks for the consumer. I think it's quite apparent to everyone. Still, even here, we'll try to make it so that all these regulatory functions and inspections would be targeted and will not stand in the way of the work of business on the whole and certain businesses. Well, you're quite right that as a response to all kind of limitations introduced against Russia and against its economy, you said that the economy was meant to be brought down. Well, it wasn't supposed to. That was the very goal, but that did not happen. Indeed, the economy became more resilient and more adjusting. It turns out that our entrepreneurial community is rather mature and is capable of taking over those spheres and those businesses that have been left by some of the partners. It was done very easily. Our businesses take over the productions that seemingly could not live without the Western presence, almost in all spheres. Yes, we see some issues in midterm perspective. We understand that we cannot produce everything. In the morning, I spoke to some of the colleagues before I traveled here. It's clear that I've been talking to everyone in the government, in the central bank, in the administration. Our experts believe that the acme of hardships that had to do with this influx of sanctions and limitations is over. Russian economy has in general adjusted to the new normal. A lot will have to be done for the new chains of supply in import and export to be created to cut down the costs that have to do with that. But in general, we've been through the worst of it. The Russian economy has adapted and will continue to develop more sustainably and more with greater sovereignty. However, the response to all these challenges should be, first and foremost, I believe, de-bureaucratization, getting rid of red tape to support businesses, and increasing the field of freedom for economic activity. Okay, Alexander, we cannot do without you. Mr. President, quite often the foreigners ask us what Russia can offer to the new world. Where are your Nobel Prize winners? Where are your great discoveries, industrial and scientific discoveries? Well, my colleagues are saying, well, what about the great Russian culture? Rublev, icons, Pushkin, great Russian architecture. Well, it's all the thing of the past. What about today? When I was listening to you today, I finally understood what Russia could offer to the modern world. It can offer the religion of justice. I think that this feeling lies in the foundation of our Russian culture, of our capability to sacrifice. Russia is alone against the cruel Western world, is fighting for justice. That is a tremendous input of today's Russia into global civilization and culture, because those previous traditional values that we've been discussing, for example, Andrei Rublev, Russian icon painter, wonderful Novgorod architecture, the golden and the silver age of architecture. They all spoke about equity and equality and justice. That is the core of the Russian civilization. Should we maybe make the Russian ideology today is the religion of justice? We have four traditional Russian religions, and I think that's quite enough. Well, it's a joke, of course. As for doing something, well, you know, I keep track of your work, and I'm always happy to read what you're writing. I know that you're a true Russian patriot in the widest sense of that word, in the best sense of the word. Do we need to present to someone these ideas specifically? Well, I don't know if it's necessary. You've just said that we're sacrificing something in the interests of other nations. I think I can argue with you here that we're not sacrificing anything. Well, we're working to strengthen our sovereignty. It is in our interests. Primarily, that is reinforcement of our financial and economic sovereignty. And that would underpin and be the foundation for our future development in technology, education, and science. Whether we have Nobel Prize winners or not, well, Alfurov made his, when did he make his mission? 30, and only 30 years later he received his Nobel Prize. Well, the ex-president of the US received a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, does it mean that it was an achievement? With all due respect to the Nobel Committee and to those who have received, have been awarded this Nobel Prize, well, that's not the only metric. Our science is developing, and we need to do everything so that the yield from the fundamental and applied sciences would be a lot higher for our development. And we will do that. What's happening today is we have great rejuvenation of scientific talent. Our scientists are one of the youngest in the world. Yes, well, the US, they have their competitive advantages considering that they have the monopoly for international finances. They suck everything out, including scientific and creative talent. But that will be over when they lose their domination with the dollar as the main currency. That's happening already. It's already underway. So what we are doing is very attractive for many countries and nations in the world. The Western partners are doing everything possible to smear Russia, to ignore its interests. So when we are fighting and standing up for our interests, and we do that openly, transparently, and courageously, well, let's be honest here, the very fact of that example, well, it's very infectious for and attractive for billions of people around the world. Take many countries in Africa. They have Russian flags. Right now, they fly Russian flags. In Latin America, the same is happening. In Asia, we have a lot of friends. And we don't have to impose anything on anyone. It's just that many people and political figures and just regular citizens, they're tired